Jetstar 810, ready to start up. Qantas 759, ready to start up. Velocity 1141, ready to start up. Qantas 926, ready to start up. Sydney Intel Ground, this is Jetstar 810, position remote 121B information Tango, IFR to Brisbane Intel, request startup. Sydney Intel Ground, this is Qantas 759, position T32 information Tango, IFR to Adelaide Intel, request startup. Sydney Intel Ground, this is Velocity 1141, position T244A information Tango, IFR to Ballina/Byron Gateway, request startup. Sydney Intel Ground, this is Qantas 926, position T31 information Tango, IFR to Cairns Intel, request startup. Jetstar 810, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 0671, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Qantas 759, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 1746, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Velocity 1141, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 3740, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Qantas 926, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 4223, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 0671, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Jetstar 810. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 1746, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Qantas 759. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 3740, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, velocity 1141. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 4223, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Qantas 926. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, Jetstar 810. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, Qantas 759. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, velocity 1141. Canberra ground, holding short runway 17, Q-link 1478. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, Qantas 926. Velocity 657, ready to start up. Velocity 947, ready to start up. Canberra ground, this is velocity 657, position A1111, information November, IFR to Sydney Intel, request start up. Q-Link 1407, ready to start up. Velocity 657, startup approved, November correct, runway 17, fly runway heading squawk 4103, for taxi clearance call 121.70, Canberra ground control. Velocity 846, ready to start up. Canberra ground, startup approved, November correct, runway 17, fly runway heading squawk 4103, for taxi clearance call 121.70, velocity 657. Q-Link 1479, ready to start up. Canberra ground, switching to 121.70, velocity 657. Q-Link 1566, ready to start up. Qantas 851, ready to start up. ZL 469, ready to start up. Canberra ground, with you, velocity 657. Sydney Intel ground, this is velocity 846, position T258, information Tango, IFR to Melbourne Intel, request start up. Canberra ground, this is Qantas 851, position A1111, information November, IFR to Melbourne Intel, request start up. Qantas 534, ready to start up. Qantas 851, startup approved, November correct, runway 17, fly runway heading squawk 2037, for taxi clearance call 121.70, Canberra ground control. Qantas 761, ready to start up. Velocity 657, Roger, Canberra ground. Canberra ground, startup approved, November correct, runway 17, fly runway heading squawk 2037, for taxi clearance call 121.70, Qantas 851. Sydney Intel ground, this is Q-Link 1479, position T318, information Tango, IFR to Canberra, request start up. Velocity 559, ready to start up. Canberra ground, switching to 121.70, Qantas 851. Qantas 530, ready to start up. Canberra ground, request taxi clearance, velocity 657. Qantas 439, ready to start up. Velocity 657, clear to taxi, Canberra ground. Velocity 1092, ready to start up. Canberra ground, with you, Qantas 851. Velocity 1178, ready to start up. Qantas 851, Roger, Canberra ground. Sydney Intel ground, this is Qantas 530, position T39, information Tango, IFR to Brisbane Intel, request start up. Canberra ground, request taxi clearance, Qantas 851. Sydney Intel ground, this is Qantas 534, position T37, information Tango, IFR to Brisbane Intel, request start up. Qantas 851, clear to taxi, Canberra ground. Qantas 530, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 5743, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Jetstar 814, ready to start up. Velocity 485, ready to start up. Qantas 577, ready to start up. Q-Link 2010, ready to start up. Velocity 1153, ready to start up. United 840, ready to start up. Sydney Intel ground, this is velocity 485, position T259, information Tango, IFR to Sunshine Coast, request start up. Velocity 846, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 4332, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Velocity 485, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 5512, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Velocity 1167, ready to start up. Sydney until ground, this is Qantas 577, position T131 information Tango, IFR to Perth, request start up. Sydney until ground, this is ZL332, position F16 information Tango, IFR to Lismore, request start up. Sydney until ground, this is Velocity 947, position T242 information Tango, IFR to Brisbane until, request start up. Sydney until ground, this is Q-Link 1407, position T369 information Tango, IFR to Bendigo, request start up. Sydney until ground, this is ZL469, position F15 information Tango, IFR to Narrandera, request start up. Sydney until ground, this is Velocity 1167, position T238 information Tango, IFR to Coffs Harbour, request start up. Sydney until ground, this is Jetstar 814, position remote 121A, information Tango, IFR to Brisbane until, request start up. ZL332, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 4472, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Sydney until ground, this is Velocity 1092, position T236 information Tango, IFR to Launceston, request start up. Sydney until ground, this is Q-Link 1566, position T365 information Tango, IFR to Gold Coast International, request start up. Velocity 1092, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 5510, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Qantas 6115, ready to start up. Jetstar 814, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 1054, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Q-Link 2209, ready to start up. Qantas 534, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 4376, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 1054, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Jetstar 814. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 5512, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, velocity 485. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 4332, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, velocity 846. Velocity 947, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 7103, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. ZL469, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 6146, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 7000 Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 5743, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, campus 530. Velocity 1421, ready to start up. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, velocity 846. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 4472, for taxi clearance call 126.50, ZL332. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, velocity 485. Sydney until ground, this is Qantas 6115, position T314, information Tango, IFR to Melbourne Intel, request startup. Sydney until ground, this is velocity 1153, position T24T5A, information Tango, IFR to Tamworth, request startup. 1407, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 4011, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Canberra ground, holding short runway 17, velocity 657. Jetstar 61, ready to start up. Qantas 577, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 1563, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Sydney until ground, this is Jetstar 61, position remote 72, information Tango, IFR to Transcend and HAT info, request startup. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, GL332. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 1563, for taxi clearance call 126.50, campus 577. Sydney until ground, this is velocity 1178, position T234, information Tango, IFR to Albury Airport, request startup. Sydney until ground, this is velocity 559, position remote 71, information Tango, IFR to Perth, request startup. Qantas 6115, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 1151, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Velocity 1153, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 5121, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 5121, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, velocity 1153. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, velocity 1153. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, velocity 947. Q-Link 1566, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 6334, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Sydney until ground, this is Qantas 439, position T312, information Tango, IFR to Melbourne Intel, request startup. Canberra ground, holding short runway 17, Qantas 851. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 1151, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Qantas 6115. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, until ground, switching to 126.50, Qantas 577. Velocity 559, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 1044, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Sydney until ground, this is Qantas 761, position T38 information Tango, IFR to Adelaide until, request startup. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, Qantas 530. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 1044, for taxi clearance call 126.50, velocity 559. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 5510, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, velocity 1092. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 6146, for taxi clearance call 126.50, ZL469. Q-Link 1479, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 0200, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Sydney until ground, this is velocity 1421, position T232 information Tango, IFR to Cairns until, request startup. Jetstar 723, ready to start up. Qantas 441, ready to start up. Velocity 1534, ready to start up. Qantas 439, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 2775, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, Jetstar 814. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 2775, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Qantas 439. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, Qantas 6115. Velocity 1178, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading information Tango, IFR to Melbourne Intel, request startup. ZL178, ready to start up. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, Qantas 439. Qantas 441, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 7224, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 7224, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Qantas 441. Velocity 1421, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 0632, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Qantas 41, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 3255, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, velocity 559. Q-Link 1421, ready to start up. Sydney Intel ground, this is Jetstar 723, position remote 102B information Tango, IFR to Hobart, request startup. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 0632, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, velocity 1421. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 6352, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, velocity 1178. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 3255, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Qantas 41. Jetstar 223, ready to start up. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, velocity 1178. Sydney Intel ground, this is Q-Link 1421, position T367 information Tango, IFR to Canberra, request startup. Sydney Intel ground, this is United 814, position T161 information Tango, IFR to Los Angeles Intel, request startup. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, velocity 1421. Sydney Intel ground, this is Q-Link 2010, position T366 information Tango, IFR to Tamworth, request startup. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, Q-Link 1479. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, Q-Link 1566. Qantas 7, ready to start up. ZL982, ready to start up. Q-Link 1421, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 3613, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Sydney Intel ground, this is velocity 1534, position T231A information Tango, IFR to Hobart, request startup. Q-Link 2010, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 0247, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, Qantas 441. Velocity 1534, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 6053, for pushback in taxi clearance. Call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. NZ110, ready to start up. Sydney Intel ground, this is NZ110, position T150 information Tango, IFR to Auckland International, request startup. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, Qantas 41. United 814, ready to start up. ZL781, ready to start up. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 4476, for pushback and taxi clearance. Call 126.50, velocity 1167. Qantas 761, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 1035, for pushback and taxi clearance. Call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Jetstar 723, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 1017, for taxi clearance. Call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, velocity 1092. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 1017, for taxi clearance. Call 126.50, Jetstar 723. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 6053, for pushback and taxi clearance. Call 126.50, velocity 1534. MH122, ready to start up. Sydney Intel ground, this is GL526, position F8 information Tango, IFR to Parks, request startup. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 1035, for pushback and taxi clearance. Call 126.50, Qantas 761. Sydney Intel ground, this is GL781, position F10 information Tango, IFR to Albury Airport, request startup. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, velocity 1534. Sydney Intel ground, this is Jetstar 223, position remote 102A, information Tango, IFR to Queenstown, request startup. ZL188, ready to start up. Sydney Intel ground, this is Q-Link 2209, position 2364 information Tango, IFR to Albury Airport, request startup. Sydney Intel ground, this is MH122, position startup location, information Tango, IFR to Kuala Lumpur Intel Sepang, request startup. TR003, ready to start up. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 3613, for taxi clearance. Call 126.50, Q-Link 1421. Jetstar 517, ready to start up. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 0247, for taxi clearance. Call 126.50, Q-Link 2010. Q-Link 2209, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 4477, for taxi clearance. Call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, Q-Link 2010. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, Jetstar 723. Sydney Intel ground, this is GL982, position F13 information Tango, IFR to Armadale, request startup. NG110, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 6343, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, campus 761. A451, ready to start up. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, velocity 1167. Jet start 223, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 0474, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Sydney Intel ground, this is TR003, position 2111, information Tango, IFR to Singapore Changi Intel, airport, request startup. United 840, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 2355, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 4477, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Q-Link 2209. ZL376, ready to start up. TR003, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 5437, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. SB141, ready to start up. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 0474, for taxi clearance call 126.50, jet start 223. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, jet start 223. Sydney Intel ground, this is SB141, position 2154, information Tango, IFR to Numi Alatong Tauuta, request startup. Sydney Intel ground, this is ZL376, position F14, information Tango, IFR to William Town, request startup. ZL982, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 0652, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Q-Link 427, ready to start up. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 5437, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, TR003. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 3770, for taxi clearance call 126.50, jet star 61. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 2355, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, United 840. Jetstar 37, ready to start up. Sydney Intel ground, this is United 840, position 2163, information Tango, IFR to Los Angeles Intel, request start up. Sydney Intel ground, this is ZL178, position F9, information Tango, IFR to Orange, request start up. Sydney Intel ground, this is Qantas 7, position 2124, information Tango, IFR to Dallas Fort Worth Intel, request start up. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, United 840. Qantas 7, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 7235, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. ZL534, ready to start up. Sydney Intel ground, this is ZL188, position F12, information Tango, IFR to Orange, request start up. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, 26.50, Jetstar 61. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, TR03. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, Q-Wing 2209. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 7235, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50. 16R, fly runway heading squawk 3673, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 3673, for taxi clearance call 126.50, ZL836. Qantas 868, ready to start up. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, Cathay 100. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 3060, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Q-Link 2034. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, ZL836. Canberra ground, this is Qantas 823, position A1111, information November, IFR to Melbourne Intel, request startup. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, ZL534. Qantas 823, startup approved, November correct, runway 35, fly runway heading squawk 6407, for taxi clearance call 121.70, Canberra ground control. Sydney Intel ground, this is United 840, position T159 information Tango, IFR to Los Angeles Intel, request startup. United 840, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 3111, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Qantas 1, ready to start up. ZL632, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 0016, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 0016, for taxi clearance call 126.50, ZL632. Canberra ground, startup approved, November correct, runway 35, fly runway heading squawk 6407, for taxi clearance call 121.70, Qantas 823. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, Q-Link 2034. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, ZL632. Sydney Intel ground, this is Qantas 868, position T312 information Tango, IFR to Gold Coast International, request startup. Canberra ground, switching to 121.70, Qantas 823. United 840, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 4331, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Canberra ground, with you, Qantas 823. Sydney Intel ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 4331, flight for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, United 840. Qantas 823, Roger, Canberra ground. Sydney Intel ground, switching to 126.50, United 840. TG472, ready to start up. Canberra ground, request taxi clearance, Qantas 823. Sydney Intel ground, this is Qantas 1, position startup location, information Tango, IFR to Singapore Changi Intel, airport, request startup. Qantas 1, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 0204, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney Intel ground control. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 0204, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Qantas 1. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, Qantas 1. Qantas 823, clear to taxi, Canberra ground. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 3111, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, United 840. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, United 840. Sydney until ground, this is United 870, position T158 information Tango, IFR to San Francisco until, request startup. Q-Link 42090 ready to start up. United 870, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 3425, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Qantas 868, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 7273, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 3425, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, United 870. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, United 870. United 840, ready to start up. Sydney until ground, this is United 840, position T153 information Tango, IFR to Los Angeles until, request startup. United 840, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 5127, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 5127, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, United 840. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, United 840. Sydney until ground, this is Q-Link 42090 position T319 information Tango, IFR to Canberra, request startup. Q-Link 42090 startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 4474, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 4474, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Q-Link 42090. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 7273, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Qantas 868. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, Q-Link 42090. Q-Link 2229, ready to start up. Sydney until ground, this is Q-Link 2229, position T317B information Tango, IFR to Wagga Wagga, request startup. Q-Link 2229, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 1775, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 1775, for taxi clearance call 126.50, Q-Link 2229. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, Q-Link 2229. Singapore 222, ready to start up. Sydney until ground, this is Singapore 222, position 2157 information Tango, IFR to Singapore Changi Intel, airport, request startup. Singapore 222, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 0603, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Sydney until ground control. Sydney until ground, startup approved, Tango correct, runway 16R, fly runway heading squawk 0603, for pushback and taxi clearance call 126.50, Singapore 222. Sydney until ground, switching to 126.50, Singapore 222. Canberra ground, holding short runway 35, Qantas 823. Qantas 823 Roger, holding short runway Canberra ground. Qantas 823 contact tower at 118.70, Canberra ground. Canberra ground Roger, switching to tower at 118.70, Qantas 823. Melbourne until ground, holding short runway 16, Qantas 822. Qantas 822 Roger, holding short runway Melbourne until ground. Melbourne until ground, holding short runway 16, Qantas 464. Qantas 464 Roger, holding short runway Melbourne until ground. Melbourne until ground, holding short runway 16, velocity 891. Velocity 891 Roger, holding short runway Melbourne until ground. Melbourne until ground, holding short runway 16, Qantas 490. Qantas 490 Roger, holding short runway Melbourne until ground. Qantas 636, ready to start up. Melbourne until ground, this is Qantas 636, position W1 overflow information Foxtrot, IFR to Brisbane Intel, request startup. Qantas 636, startup approved, Foxtrot correct, runway 16, fly runway heading squawk 0270, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.70, Melbourne until ground control. Melbourne until ground, startup approved, Foxtrot correct, runway 16, fly runway heading squawk 0270, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.70, Qantas 636. Melbourne until ground, switching to 121.70, Qantas 636. Melbourne until ground, with you, Qantas 636. Qantas 636, Roger, Melbourne until ground. Melbourne until ground, request pushback, Qantas 636. Qantas 636, pushback approved, Melbourne until ground. Queuing 2086, ready to start up. Qantas 45, ready to start up. Melbourne until ground, this is Qantas 45, position B28 information Foxtrot, IFR to Denpasar NGURAH Rai Intel, request startup. Qantas 45, startup approved, Foxtrot correct, runway 16, fly runway heading squawk 0566, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.70, Melbourne until ground control. Melbourne until ground, startup approved, Foxtrot correct, runway 16, fly runway heading squawk 0566, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.70, Qantas 45. Melbourne until ground, switching to 121.70, Qantas 45. Melbourne until ground, with you, Qantas 45. Qantas 45, Roger, Melbourne until ground. Melbourne until ground, request pushback, Qantas 45. Qantas 45, pushback approved, Melbourne until ground. Melbourne until ground, this is Qling 2086, position W1 overflow information Foxtrot, IFR to Mildura, request startup. Qling 2086, startup approved, Foxtrot correct, runway 16, fly runway heading squawk 2242, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.70, Melbourne Intel ground control. Melbourne Intel ground, startup approved, Foxtrot correct, runway 16, fly runway heading squawk 2242, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.70, Q-Link 2086. Melbourne Intel ground, switching to 121.70, Q-Link 2086. Melbourne Intel ground, with you, Q-Link 2086. Q-Link 2086, Rockshire, Melbourne Intel ground. Melbourne Intel ground, request pushback, Q-Link 2086. Q-Link 2086, pushback approved, Melbourne Intel ground. Qantas 701, ready to start up.
$2,500. $2,000.
Melbourne Intel Ground, this is Qantas 701, position F15 information Foxtrot, IFR to Adelaide Intel, request startup. Qantas 701, startup approved, Foxtrot correct, runway 16, fly runway heading squawk 1366, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.70, Melbourne Intel ground control. Melbourne Intel ground, startup approved, Foxtrot correct, runway 16, fly runway heading squawk 1366, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.70, Qantas 701. Melbourne Intel ground, switching to 121.70, Qantas 701. Melbourne Intel ground, with you, Qantas 701. Qantas 701, Roger, Melbourne Intel ground. Melbourne Intel ground, ready to taxi, Qantas 636. Melbourne Intel ground, request pushback, Qantas 701. Qantas 636, clear to taxi, Melbourne Intel ground. Qantas 701, pushback approved, Melbourne Intel ground. Melbourne Intel ground, clear to taxi, Qantas 636.
500. $500. $400. 100 above. $300.
Too low, terrain.
Minimum. 200. $100. 50. 40. 30. 20. Retard, 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 retard.
Qantas 492, ready to start up. Melbourne Intel Ground, ready to taxi, Q-Link 2086. Q-Link 2086, clear to taxi, Melbourne Intel Ground. Melbourne Intel Ground, clear to taxi, Q-Link 2086. Melbourne Intel Ground, this is Qantas 492, position B30 information Foxtrot, IFR to Sydney Intel, request startup. Qantas 492, startup approved, Foxtrot correct, runway 16, fly runway heading squawk 3300. For pushback and taxi clearance call 121.70, Melbourne Intel Ground Control. Melbourne Intel Ground, startup approved, Foxtrot correct, runway 16, fly runway heading squawk 3312, for pushback and taxi clearance call 121.70, Qantas 492. Melbourne Intel Ground, switching to 121.70, Qantas 492. Melbourne Intel Ground, with you, Qantas 492. Qantas 492, Roger, Melbourne Intel Ground. Melbourne Intel Ground, request pushback, Qantas 492. Qantas 492, pushback approved, Melbourne Intel Ground. Qantas 653, ready to start up. Qantas 7304, ready to start up. Melbourne Intel ground, ready to taxi, Qantas 701. Qantas 701, cleared to taxi, Melbourne Intel ground. Melbourne Intel ground, cleared to taxi, Qantas 701. Melbourne Intel ground, this is Qantas 653, position W1 overflow information Foxtrot, IFR to